Welcome to the Butterfly Tumblr Radio channel. Are you ready to start today's story? Let's get started. Imagine the betrayal by your most trusted companion, and the secret that could shatter your entire world. This is not a simple love story, it is a profound narrative about deception, betrayal, and revenge. Follow the footsteps of Alex Thompson as he uncovers his heart-wrenching discovery and the extreme choices he makes in an attempt to reclaim all that he has lost. My name is Alex Thompson. Until October 16, 2010, the worst day in my life was April 20th of that year. That's when I returned home early from a business trip to find my wife of 6 years, Martin, in bed with Mark Davis. More about what happened on October 16th later. Martin's infidelity did not entirely surprise me. She had been dissatisfied with me and our lifestyle. The recent recession hit us hard, and we were struggling to pay our mortgage. Our home was worth less than our loan. Martin wanted to give up, but I knew we could persevere. Frustratingly, she had insisted on purchasing a huge property, and now the majority of our money went toward mortgage payments. Martin had been difficult ever since Christmas when she was dissatisfied with her gift. I did nothing to make her happy. Our daughter, Emma, was the only source of joy in my life. Her joy when I returned home contrasted dramatically with Martin's scorn. Marrying Martin was a mistake from the beginning. We were both coming out of bad relationships and felt excluded among our married friends, so we rushed into marriage despite our rocky start. I eventually fell in love with Martin, especially after Emma was born. While some couples end their relationship after having children, others appear to strengthen, or so I thought. It turns out Martin was either a fantastic actress or had a split personality until the end of last year. I thought we had a wonderful connection and a happy family. Silly me. I told Martin I'd be back for my business trip on Thursday, but I really returned on Wednesday. Martin worked in the mornings and had the afternoons free because Emma was at school. I planned to surprise her. Driving along our block, I saw a strange vehicle. It was thoughtless of Martin, but we didn't know many neighbors, and the majority of the block was unoccupied owing to the housing crisis. I entered the house without having to be quiet due to the loudness from the master bedroom. I stood for a few seconds, took some pictures with my phone, and felt great sadness as I realized my marriage was over. We couldn't get over the dishonesty and betrayal. Now I had to realize how bad our financial position would get and become a part-time father. I'd miss out on the opportunity to hold my daughter every day and adore the woman I fell for. Martin noticed me and screamed, "Get out of here, Alex! What the hell are you doing at home today?" I was stunned and reacted terribly. I grabbed Martin's hair, brought her face close to mine, and exclaimed, "You're an idiot! Do you dare to ask why I came home early? You were with that jerk in my bed, and you assault me." Mark was behind me, amid the chaos, and I didn't notice. He called 911, and while we were still yelling, cops arrived. Mark, wrapped in a sheet, greeted them at the entrance. They burst into the bedroom, discovered I had pulled Martin's hair, and arrested me. After a few days, I posted bail only to discover that our accounts had been drained, and Martin had left with Emma. I returned to an empty house. When I returned to work on Monday, a bath was waiting. Martin filed for divorce, citing me of mental and physical abuse. I countersued for infidelity, but it wasn't effective. The courts gave Martin custody, and I was required to pay child support and alimony. Despite the fact that I still had a job, my credit suffered significantly when I sold the house. My life was a shambles. If not for Emma, I would have left town. One good note was the dismissal of assault allegations. I spent too many evenings at Johnny's Tavern, listening to drunks say they would never let this happen to them. Some criticized me for allowing someone to steal my wife. I switched bars after hearing full too many times. While leaving one night, I felt degraded. My co-workers pitted or despised me. I began to consider the drunk advice on revenge. They boasted about their plans to strike against people who had damaged my life. One Sunday, while visiting my parents with Emma, I expressed my emotions of impotence over coffee. My parents were stunned, and my father broke the silence. "Do you seek vengeance, Alex?" he inquired. I don't know, Father. I just feel like I need to do something. Revenge is complicated. It appears to fill a void, but rarely does it spiral out of control. You retaliate, and their friends or family respond. Just ask any Chicago gang member how effective the eye for an eye idea is, I said. I generally appreciated my father's problem-solving strategy of pondering before acting, but I didn't want to be misled. Alex, I will be extremely unhappy if you seek vengeance. I raised you better than that. Just forget it, he advised. Contrary to my father's instruction, violence rarely solves problems. On a Saturday night, everything came together as I exited my restaurant. I noticed Mark and Martin across the street, leaving an expensive restaurant. While waiting for a valet, they kissed. A lovely Lexus pulled up, and I jumped in as the car drove away. I noticed Martin's head sink into Mark's lap. I went over to my old Chevy and sat down, cursing loudly and beating the steering wheel. After I had calmed down, I turned on the ignition. The car is the only one I can afford, my finances were in shambles, so I barely got started. I thought I had everything sorted out. Several weeks later, I approached Mark at night. Before he knew it, I was hitting him in the ribs with a bat. I avoided his head, not wanting to kill him, only to handicap him. I swung again, breaking his right leg and arm as he lay on the ground, attempting to defend himself. I aimed at his groin. Someone shouted, "I've already contacted the cops." I bolted, throwing the bat, jacket, and mask into a garbage 3 blocks away. The following time I picked Emma up, Martin said immediately, "Did you attack Mark?" I intended to make Martin sweat, so I simply smirked without admitting or denying anything. I was the primary suspect, and the cops questioned me several times. I had no alibi and just stated that I spent the evening alone in my apartment. There were no witnesses, and the weapon was never recovered. Only one motivation linked me to the crime. When one of Johnny's drunks got into difficulty, he attempted to make a deal. He told the cops he knew someone who hit Mark with a bat and that I had been bragging about it. The alcoholic was lying, but the cops and DEA did not appear to notice. I was accused of both severe assault and attempted homicide. With minimal funds, I was appointed a public defender. The DA's case was based on circumstantial evidence and a drunken false testimony. The jury found me guilty of aggravated assault, not attempted homicide. I couldn't argue too much. I had used the bat to strike Mark. Something worked in my advantage. Mark's injuries had mostly healed by the time he was sentenced, which happened 3 months after the incident. The judge handed me a reduced sentence, 5 years in medium security jail. What happened on October 16th was worse than catching my wife with Mark. That was the day I had to report to my cellmate, Ronald, also known as Ron. I'm not bisexual and never wanted to be with a male, but I had no choice. I ended up without teeth, a fractured nose, and 2 black eyes. Ron and his Aryan gang coerced me into this jail romance, comply or perish. This nightmare produced 2 positive outcomes. Ron's exclusivity meant that I was off limits to other inmates and safe from non-Aryan gangs. But what type of sick system subjected convicts to such mistreatment? I understand my 5-year term and loss of liberty, but why do we tolerate even a joke about physical abuse of inmates? I haven't molested anyone, so why am I having to go through this to survive? Obtaining information from the outside is difficult. After 6 months and several letters, my mother paid me a visit. My father still refused to talk to me, and my mother came not out of pity but to inform me that Martin had married Mark and relocated to Texas. They did not let us see Emma before they departed, and she was never allowed to answer the phone when we called. I haven't seen or spoken with my only grandchild. I appealed to Martin's mother for understanding, but she laughed. Their family's wickedness is unimaginable. Mom, I have never cheated on Martin. She cheated on me. All of my letters to Emma were returned unopened, I said. I'm working with a jail counselor to convince the judge to let me connect with my kid. Soon after my mother softened, understanding how deeply I was upset, she expressed affection throughout the remainder of her visit and promised to return. I didn't tell her about the worst aspects of my confinement, and she didn't ask. I will not go into detail about those 5 years. I did not re-educate myself, develop new skills, or grow as a person. Following a catastrophic parole hearing, I learned to conceal my feelings. In my first year as an iron rod cellmate, I built muscle at the gym while focusing my rage on Ron, Martin, and Mark. My 6 feet 1 inch frame grew to 210 pounds of muscle. When Ron met a new companion, I was left to fend for myself. When they initially came for me, there were 2 of them. They hit me hard, but both ended up in the hospital, and I spent a month in special housing. Unfortunately, my first parole hearing was planned for that month and was not rescheduled. It took another 2 years to see the parole board. Throughout the hearing, I tried to find the appropriate words when a smug board member inquired why I never apologized for bullying my ex-wife. I couldn't help but let out all of the hate that had accumulated inside of me. I was married to Martin for 6 years, and never raised my hand to her. She cheated on me in our bed. My one stupid deed of attacking her partner caused me to succumb to another man in order to survive and fight malice. The state attempts the justice system allowed her to unjustly accuse me of violence, seize all of our possessions, and prohibit me from getting a competent attorney. It permits my ex-wife to deny me contact with my daughter. I've served 5 years without hearing from my daughter. My case against Martin went nowhere. I battled for my life every day, and while I did not gain any new legal abilities, I did learn how to defraud others online. I took a night job loading trucks for just above minimum wage, which was enough to keep me off the streets during the day. I worked on a new computer, Compu, establishing the persona of Amy Carson, a widow who was building a humane pet rescue. The Save Our Fur Friends website solicited donations, and with tens of thousands of email addresses, I was able to raise some money. In 2 months, I had $21,000, which was enough to fund my post-prison aspirations. Sophia Sweet was a vision on a bar stool. It had been more than 6 years since I had touched a lady. I was dressed in Goodwill pants and a sport coat, carrying a clinic certificate and 7 $1,000 bills in my pocket. I approached her. Alex, she grinned while wearing pants, not a skirt. I pondered, given that I was spending the night with this lovely escort for $600 plus tip, the slacks impacted her prosthetic leg, something some customers had complained about, so she received a discount. It didn't matter to me. I was content to save a few hundred. I ordered a shot of bourbon and sat next to Sophia, who was drinking a martini. The guy on her right shot me a filthy look. Sophia stated, "The gentleman next to me insisted on buying me this drink." I informed him, I was waiting for someone, and it wasn't required. Sophia placed her hand on my shoulder, signaling me to be calm. I counted to 5 and remained composed. I took out a $20 bill and said, "Excuse me, sir. I appreciate you buying my partner a drink, but could you please accept this as repayment?" I held up the money, so we could see the scars on my hand, a recollection of jail fights. He smirked and accepted the $20. I can't blame a guy for trying with such a lovely lady. "Have a lovely date," he spoke and then walked away. Sophia commended me for being a gentleman. "Where did you learn to diffuse situations so effectively?" she asked. It's too early to discuss my life story, and I've heard it's best not to ask escorts sensitive questions. "Let's discuss the cabanas," I replied. When the bartender put my bourbon in front of me, he said, "It is on the house. Thank you for managing this politely. We had a fight here last week, and it cost me $400 in damages. I'll never see $1 from the drunk who caused it, and my insurance doesn't cover the entire cost." I raised my glass to the bartender and drank the drink he'd poured me, a decent one. Sophia and I finished our drinks, said our goodbyes, waved at the other guy, and strolled outside into the night. "I've got a room next door. Do you need anything to eat before we drive over?" I asked. "No, I am fine. Perhaps we will order pizza or Chinese food later," she replied. "This is your money. We will do whatever you wish." I took Candy's hand and guided her to the motel. Inside the elevator, I could not stop smiling. Sophia looked at me and asked, "You're just incredibly gorgeous." We arrived at the room and proceeded immediately, then we relaxed. I didn't expect that. Sophia looked at me again and asked, "What?" I replied, "I didn't anticipate it to be that amazing or that you'd appreciate it so much." Sophia laughed. "Well, I am a professional." She continued to laugh but not at me anymore. "I've never paid for this before. I assumed someone doing it for a living would have to pretend, but you didn't appear to be pretending." "Thank you," I said. "Do you wish to place an order now?" We ordered Chinese food and took a shower while waiting. I saw her prosthetic limb for the first time. It was metal, right below the knee. She noticed me looking and asked, "Is it bothering you?" I replied, "Actually, no. It's great." When we walked to the room, I noticed no limp. We made love again and went to bed. We showered again in the morning, and she noticed me looking at her prosthetic. "It was a motorcycle accident," she said. "Everyone wants to know how this happened. You were too polite to ask." I was dating a guy named Randy. He acquired a new bike and wanted to show off, claiming to be a fantastic rider. I was stupid and rode with him. He started bragging, lost control, and we slid down. I lost a leg. What happened to Randy? Neither of us wore helmets, another stupid decision. He damaged his head on a lamp post, went into a coma, and died a week later when they turned off the machine. I know I sound cold, but he crashed, and now my leg is gone. He didn't have insurance, so I had to fund all my medical expenditures. That's why I'm a strumpet. What is the worst part? My parents cut me out of their lives when they found out. They didn't want a strumpet for a daughter. There are worse things than getting paid for lovemaking, like what? Consider my ex-wife, for instance. So I told Sophia about Martin. She agreed my ex was worse and called her an even bigger strumpet. All I could do was laugh, probably for the first time. "Are you hungry? Can I buy you breakfast?" I asked. "Yeah, that would be nice. Then I have to get to class." "I'm not going to be a strumpet forever," she replied. "You hear stories about men falling in love with escorts, and people like Sophia. I understand why, but let's be realistic. She's a prostitute, and even if she wasn't, what could I offer any woman?" The next day, excitedly anticipated the second phase of my plan. I met Kyle Price at a downtown diner. Kyle, an outside liaison for a black prison gang named The Price, agreed on one condition: when the knife slashed his throat, 2 names, mine and Johansson's, would be whispered into his ear. Once Kyle agreed, I handed him $115,000. Yang was one of the smartest defendants, but he was never convicted. I knew what was going on inside. "I can't blame you for wanting revenge." "It's not revenge, it is justice," Johansson said. He was a good guy. About a year after he became Young's plaything, he died. Rumors on the yard said Ron held the kid's head too long and strangled him. Johansson deserved more. Young spent 2 months in solitary and was jailed for not reporting Johansson's end of life until the next morning. That's it. Whatever the reason, he has died, and you know no one will ever learn about our bargain. I understand. I haven't lasted 5 years by talking too much. Jewel nodded and departed. 4 days later, 4 inmates were eliminated in a prison riot triggered by the stabbing of Aaron Ronald Ion, Ron Young. 1 inmate was suspected of the homicide and was eliminated in the riot. The prison was closed for 3 days. The Amy Carson website had run its course. I turned it down before police enforcement detected and started maltreating me. It was a small affair, now with too little money involved for any agencies to investigate. My focus shifted to finding Emma. Martin's Facebook page disappeared 2 years ago. According to the last post, the family lived in the Dallas suburbs. Emma had just turned 9, and the joyful family, Martin, Mark, and Emma, posed in front of Disneyland's gates. Then nothing. Imagine my amazement when, simply for fun, I googled Mark Davis and realized he was living in Chicago again. Nothing turned up on Martin, but at least I had a lead. It cost a private investigator $1,000 of my illicit earnings to find out where Mark lived and worked, that he no longer lived with my ex, and where he hung out after work. Mark took a few moments to identify me, seated next to him at the bar. Understandable, since I appeared different from the last time he saw me, at my sentence for assaulting him with a Louisville slugger. My muscular build, smashed nose, and shaved head probably looked intimidating. He turned to me and asked, "Are we going to have a problem?" I had thought about the subject and prepared an answer. "No, Mark. Striking you with a baseball bat was a mistake. It cost me 5 years of freedom, innumerable horrors in prison, and the pleasure of watching my darling girl grow up. I came to inquire if you knew where Emma was. I'd tell you if I did." Martin left me for another guy, and the three of them fled for parts unknown. I observed Mark's eyes as he answered. Prisoners learn to make eye contact because the eyes are the windows to the soul. I believe Mark was telling the truth. To reinforce my intuition, Mark proceeded, "Alex, I shouldn't have been connected with Martin when she was still married to you. It was wrong. I adored Martin and assumed she felt the same way. It stung like hell when she left me for that guy. It was the first time I realized how you felt. When we started dating, she fed me lies that I didn't recognize until I came back here and talked to several couples you used to know. When I initially met Martin, she told me you exploited her and Emma, said your marriage was a fake, it was only a matter of time until she died or divorced you. I believed I was her hero in shining armor. When you struck me, it simply strengthened her story." Mark drank his beer and continued, "I disagreed with Martin when she excluded you and your family from Emma's life. I assumed that was an error. Martin urged me to back out because Emma wasn't my child, and I had no say. Emma and I had a fantastic relationship for 3 years. I adored her, but I was never her father. Emma missed you." I tried not to cry when Mark said that, but my eyes wet. Mark asked the bartender for a pen and paper. "I'm not sure where they ended up, but this is the name of the guy who succeeded me, Brian Stewart. He worked as a carpenter for a Plano-based real estate developer, Homes. He was working on houses a block away from ours. I don't know how he and Martin met. I found out when a neighbor called to inquire why Martin was packing his truck. I came home right before they left. We were yelling when the cops arrived because of the police. I knew his name and place of job. They went, and I discovered a letter in the kitchen saying farewell. Our accounts were cleared out. I spent thousands of dollars looking for Martin and came up empty-handed. A year later, I filed a lawsuit alleging infidelity and desertion. We sold our house and moved here." Mark's expression conveyed resentment as he narrated his narrative. He still had a hatred against Martin and me. "I just wanted to see my daughter." I thanked Mark for the information, bought him a beer, and left the bar, thinking about my next step. Mark had spent hundreds searching for Martin. Why would I squander my limited resources doing the same? There was one person who was likely to know where Martin and Emma were, Martin's mother. However, she would probably keep me from finding out. It was hazardous if caught. I would be returned to prison, but I couldn't think of another option. Eleanor Green was a creature of habit. I always knew she went to church every Sunday at 9 a.m. She always left an extra home key in the imitation stone next to the patio entrance. Why bother having a spare key when Brutus, her Rottweiler, was always present? At 9:02, I climbed over the fence in the alley behind her house. The key was in position. I opened the patio door and heard Brutus snarl, which would have terrified anyone else. Brutus walked around the corner into the kitchen where I stood, hoping he remembered me. It had been 6 years since Brutus had seen me, but the number of years did not matter. Brutus got up on his hind legs and licked my face. He remembered the man who had picked him up from the shelter, took him to Eleanor's house, taught him, and fed him treats. While Brutus was reacquainting himself with me, I walked up to the counter, removed a dog treat from the jar, and threw it on the floor. Brutus scrambled for it. I made use of the pause to glance around the kitchen, which had remained unchanged since John Green died 9 years ago. Eleanor paid her bills on a computer at her desk. I turned it on, and a password prompt came up. After a brief consideration, I typed John 3:16, and the computer started to boot up. While it was starting, I browsed through the drawers and discovered some letters with return addresses. Martin lived in El Pozo. I connected a flash drive to the USB connector and copied Eleanor's photo, video, and email files. After acquiring what I needed, I turned off the computer, rubbed Brutus behind the ears, closed the door, and replaced the key. I spent the rest of Sunday watching films and photos of my kid growing up. Emma had grown so much, she was a stunning young girl. I felt foolish for missing those years. I discovered from the envelopes and emails that Martin and Emma's last names had changed to Green. Martin stayed with Brian Stewart but did not marry him. Emma was a 5th grader. On Monday, I gave the information and a $500 fee to a private investigator in El Pozo, who confirmed the address and other details as current. Tuesday morning, after work, I knocked on my folks' door. Although my mother had paid me a visit in prison, I had not seen my father since my incarceration. Back then, he looked at me with sadness and pain. Now he was standing at the door, and I wondered if he would let me in. "Hello, Dad," I said. Dad swung the door wide and drew me inside. He gazed into my eyes and held me. "Mary, Alex is here," he called to my mother. Mom entered the room and hugged me. "Would you like any coffee?" she asked. "Yes, please," I replied. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had eaten lunch as a child. "First and foremost, let me apologize for failing to meet your expectations. I apologize for not listening to your wise comments. I'm sorry I let a bunch of losers convince me to seek vengeance," I said. Mom hugged me again, and Dad squeezed my shoulder. "I know where Martin and Emma are, and I'd like you to help me reconnect with Emma. I have a few $1,000 to travel to El Pozo and do whatever it takes to secure visiting rights. Will you come with me and assist?" I asked. Dad responded first, "What are you going to do?" "Nothing violent, right?" I was hurt that his first question was about my prior actions. "No, I'm going to consult with a lawyer first. I've done my time. I'm not a paroi, so I may go in and seek a court order for visitation. But let's be honest, I'm an ex-convict who was convicted of assault. I believe it would be great if my folks came with me and all three of us filed an appeal." Dad looked at Mom, and I could see the begging in her eyes. "She didn't need to say anything," Dad agreed. "When do we go? Can you get ready in a week? I need to offer notice at work and address a few issues. Could we take your car? We will need wheels while we are there," I asked. "Yeah, I'll take it to the shop tomorrow to ensure it's ready to go." "We'll leave next Monday," Dad replied. I had another cup of coffee and caught up on some family gossip. It was great to be home again. Over the next 3 days, I spent my leisure time researching the best family lawyers in the El Pozo area. After locating one with excellent recommendations, I called and scheduled an appointment for the following Thursday. This provided us 3 full days to drive to El Pozo. I hoped Dad and Mom could make the trip. Dad was about 70, and Mom was 66. Dad's Lincoln Continental was ready. It turned out that good old Mom was a huge Matthew McConaughey admirer. It would have been the ideal vehicle for the journey, but when Dad learned about the Thursday appointment, we all agreed to depart on Sunday and take an extra day to travel the 1,500 miles. On Sunday, I, a 36-year-old guy, set out for the trip with my mother and father. We drove out of town. It's mostly freeways now, but it used to be Route 66 before. We entered St. Louis, and Dad informed us that when he was 3 years old, his parents drove that road to Los Angeles. Back then, all roads were 2 lanes, and you couldn't drive more than 400 miles in one day. It took the family 7 days to reach Los Angeles. It appears that my grandfather, who died before I was born, had a job waiting for him in California. One of his army pals worked in a painting company after the war, with all the new structures being built. It was expected to be a gold mine. Unfortunately, Dad mentioned his mother, my grandmother, was homesick the entire year they lived in Pasadena. My grandfather picked up his family and returned to Raisin. Everything turned out well in the end. My grandfather rose to the position of CEO at an aluminum plant. He was doing well until he was discovered leaned over his desk dead from a heart attack at the age of 58. I was born a year later and named in his honor. During the 4 days we spent in the car, Mom and Dad told us more stories from the past. I either forgot or was too busy to listen to these stories. I moved away when I was 18, so this was the longest time we had spent together since our last trip to Washington, D.C. when I was 14. On Thursday afternoon, we arrived at Gladys Harper's law office. Unlike my past contacts with the law, this was a favorable one. I told the lawyer everything, including how I was convicted, my time in jail, my lack of connection with Emma, how my parents were denied contact, my divorce from Martin, her subsequent marriage, and her divorce from Mark. The lawyer's eyes brightened up when she learned Mark was suing for infidelity and child abandonment. It wasn't a lovely picture, and it didn't make Martin look like an angel. The lawyer's hesitation to handle our case evaporated as my mother nearly burst into tears, saying how she couldn't hang on to her granddaughter. I paid the lawyer a deposit, and she began working on the paperwork. Now all we had to do was wait. We decided not to spend the weekend in El Pozo and instead visited Big Bend National Park. Despite our preoccupation with the events in El Pozo, we had a fantastic weekend exploring the peaceful and beautiful park along the Rio Grande. 4 days later, I received a call from the administrator, Miss Harper. We were to meet at her office on Tuesday morning to prepare for a hearing before a judge. Gladys Harper had a full schedule, and by Tuesday afternoon, she even had a signed statement from Mark Davis claiming that Martin had dumped him and ended his relationship with Emma. Mark only did this under one condition, which I later discovered: Emma needed to be told that Mark had not abandoned her and that he loved her. We met again in the courthouse foyer and proceeded to the judge's office. I am not naive. Within the first 10 minutes, it was clear that the judge and our attorney worked well together. We responded to the judge's questions. Miss Harper then stated that we were only looking for a preliminary meeting with Emma to restore contact and would be happy to have a court-appointed social worker accompany us. Miss Harper informed the judge that given Miss Green's previous actions in denying the client's contact with Emma and then doing the same with Mark Davis, we requested that Martin Green not be informed of the meeting, as she is likely to use this time to delay it and further turn Emma against the client. That's where the working relationship and all of our money for Harper paid off when the judge granted the request. I could not have been more surprised. The meeting was scheduled for the next day. We were to pick Emma up from school with the judge's order in hand, accompanied by Miss Harper and a social worker. We were given 3 hours to take Emma to a nearby cafe, talk to her, and then drive her home. Walking out of the courthouse into the warm Texas sunshine, I couldn't remember feeling so light and happy. It took all of my willpower not to hug Miss Harper right there. She stated that she was already working on the paperwork to establish visitation rights for me and my parents. We'll meet tomorrow at 1:45 in my office. The social worker will accompany you to the school. I shall leave you once we have picked up Emma. The social worker will accompany you until you take Emma home. Until tomorrow, avoid doing anything that could cause problems. Stay sober. Remain calm, whatever you're saying or doing, especially when Emma's mother overreacts. Remain calm. We expect her to do or say something in front of the social worker that will only benefit us when we apply for visitation. Treat the social worker as if she were a friend because she may become one if the matter goes back to court. The judge just granted us a priceless gift, so treat it accordingly. With those remarks, she walked away. I hugged Mom and Dad and thanked them again for their assistance. The next 22 hours dragged on. We stayed close to the hotel and ate at the diner across the street. Part of me expected horrible things to happen, like us arriving at Emma's school tomorrow and finding that she is not there. My parents did their best to soothe me, but I could see the fear on their faces. We arrived at Victoria Harper's office around 35 minutes later. A small, overweight woman of Hispanic origin entered the workplace. Miss Marie Hernandez presented herself and spent several minutes explaining how she planned to conduct surveillance without being intrusive. She must have read our attorney's motions because she was quite kind to my mother, as one grandma to another. Miss Hernandez also advised us on how to effectively approach Emma after such an extended and terrible separation. Later, we were grateful for this advice. I had been worried about how Emma would react to my appearance. We entered the school's administrative office 30 minutes before dismissal. The principal and vice principal read the court order, called the district office, and conferred with the legal department before deciding to let Emma go with us. 5 minutes before the dismissal bell rang, Emma was hauled out of class and led to the vice principal's office. Emma's eyes lighted up when she recognized her grandmother. Now, the first person she saw, Emma rushed into her grandmother's arms, and my mother sank on one knee to hug her back. She was openly crying. Emma looked up when she noticed my father approaching. "Daddy," Emma couldn't speak. "Grandpa," so she called him Daddy. The name stuck, and we all thought it was adorable. Daddy took up Emma, hugged her, and kissed her on the nose. Emma then noticed me standing off to the side. "Daddy, my appearance has changed since our previous meeting." Her hesitation was natural. Miss Hernandez had suggested that Emma see her grandparents first because they looked the same as they did 5 years ago, and there is usually a unique link between grandparents. I knelt and extended my arms, hoping my hug would be received. Emma raced into my arms. Our reunion was cut short when the vice principal entered the office alongside Martin, who was waiting in the parking lot to pick up Emma. Martin looked around and burst, "What the hell is going on? What are you guys doing here? Leave Emma alone." Miss Harper entered, accompanied by Miss Hernandez. Miss Harper delivered Martin the court order. "Miss Green, this court order authorizes Emma's father and grandparents to pay her a 3-hour visit today, accompanied by Miss Hernandez to ensure Emma's safety and compliance with the order. Please return Emma to you within 3 hours, beginning immediately." Martin looked at the documents and returned them to Miss Harper. "I don't care what the papers say, you cannot just go in here and steal my daughter." Martin pointed to me and my parents. "They have no business being here. She's my daughter." Martin grabbed Emma, who was hiding behind my mom. Miss Hernandez, standing in front of Martin, noticed this dynamic before Miss Green could continue. Martin yelled at her, using disrespectful language about Miss Hernandez's ethnicity and physical appearance. "Miss Green, would you like me to call the police if you continue to threaten individuals? I guarantee you will be arrested." At this point, the vice principal stepped in, attempting to calm Martin. They entered her office, and we used the chance to leave with Emma and Miss Hernandez. The 4 of us sat in a small cafe a few blocks from the school, with Miss Hernandez at a nearby table. She had given us advice on how to initiate a conversation with Emma after so many years apart. We followed her suggestion, and it made a significant difference. Emma didn't appear intimidated by our presence, but my heart fell when my young kid cried, "Daddy, why didn't you ever call or write me? Why didn't I get cards for my birthday?" Fortunately, I was prepared. "Emma, I thought about you every day we were apart. Here are all of the letters, postcards, and birthday cards I mailed. They were all returned to me. Your mother sent them back. She did not want me in your life, in your grandparents' life, in your lifetime. Twice, I hired lawyers to persuade her to let me speak to you." I showed Emma the envelopes, each labeled, "Return to sender, by Martin." "But Daddy, why did she do that?" I wanted to remark that your mother is a cow, but I did not. I grasped her hand and said, "Someday you'll have to ask your mother about this, but not today. Today, let us just discuss together, you, myself, and your grandparents. We all love you and want to hear how you're doing at school. What are your friends' names? Do you participate in any sports?" 3 hours whizzed by. The 5 of us piled into Dad's Lincoln and proceeded to Martin's house. Arriving on time, Martin was standing on the porch, smoking a cigarette and looking angry. Emma inquired from the back seat, "I'd like to show you my room." I looked at Martin and said, I'm not sure if that is a good idea today, Emma. Your mother does not appear to want us in your house, but it is mine, and I should be able to welcome people into my room. Emma looked so insulted that Mom asked, "Why don't you show me your room today?" Emma, next time we'll all see it. Emma agreed. Miss Hernandez said that she needed to accompany them. Mom, Miss Hernandez, and Emma stepped out of the rear seat and walked up to the porch. Dad and I could not hear the words properly, but the conversation was hot. As frightening as Martin appeared, Miss Hernandez was even more frightening. A few minutes later, Mom, Miss Hernandez, and Emma entered the house. Martin remained on the porch, shooting daggers at Dad and me. She even tripped us up. I still don't understand why Martin dislikes me so much, I thought. We'd been standing there for approximately 10 minutes when 2 patrol cars arrived, one in front of us and one behind. I will admit this for a second, I panicked. Did a hit and run with Ronald Young? Got out, and someone discovered I was behind the false internet hoax? I was so close to reuniting with my little girl, and now it was here. Police officers spilled out of 2 patrol cars. Brian Stewart pulled up in the driveway and dashed to the porch. Miss Hernandez greeted them at the front entrance. Dad and I watched as police officers handcuffed Martin and Brian. What the hell was happening? I wanted to leap out of the car, but Dad stopped me. I am going to take a look, Alex. You stay here. It was not a request. It was an order. Before Dad could get out of his automobile, Mom exited the home, swiftly walked over to the car, and sat in the back seat. 2 police officers escorted Brian and Martin into one of the patrol cars. One cop from the second car remained on the porch, and the other entered the house alongside Miss Hernandez. They returned with Emma. Mom, what the hell is going on? I do not know. Miss Hernandez was browsing around Emma's room when she spotted a toy on her shelf. She snatched it up and asked Emma questions that I couldn't hear. Miss Hernandez took out her phone and called the police, requesting that 2 patrol cars arrive as soon as possible. That is all I know. Miss Hernandez approached our automobile. I apologize, but Emma is accompanying me to the station. We need to ask her some questions. Call Miss Harper and ask her to meet us there. Emma will most likely stay with the social services family until everything is sorted. I had to inquire what exactly needed to be done. What's happening? We do not know yet. I don't believe Emma has been abused, but some suspicious items were discovered in her room, and the police must investigate. In the meantime, Emma will be safe with me. Please be patient. Please trust me. I solely worry about Emma's well-being. Call Miss Harper. It took 3 weeks, but we finally obtained the full story. Everything worked out well for us, thanks to Gladys Harper's expertise. Miss Hernandez spotted the teddy animal on Emma's shelf and recognized it as a remote camera. She called the police, and the camera was sufficient to obtain a search warrant. Brian's PC was determined to have all of the incriminating information. It came out that Martin was unaware of Brian's surveillance. It didn't help that Martin had made disparaging comments about Miss Hernandez at school. Judge Torres attempted to be unbiased, but it did not benefit Martin. Miss Harper made such a strong case that Martin was not even granted visitation. 2 months after coming to Texas, we were leaving in Dad's car with Emma strapped into the seat next to Mom. Emma and I lived in my in-laws' residence for virtually the entire first year. We had to follow the therapist's advice and treat Emma with care. Mark was even allowed to attend Emma's 11th birthday party. The therapist recommended forgiveness, which included allowing Martin's mother restricted access to Emma. These precautions kept me on my toes, but after a half-hour chat with Emma's therapist, I decided that it was for Emma's sake, and I just had to accept it. The worst thing was when Martin returned to the city. We allowed Emma to see her mother at her grandmother's place several times before her mother received a call from Eleanor Green. I hate to tell you this, but Martin is saying nasty things about you, Alex, and Hank. I can't believe I raised such a bad guy. It breaks my heart, but I do not want you to alienate me from my grandchild. "I don't think Martin should be with Emma anymore," Eleanor said. That was all I needed to hear. Martin was cut off from Emma, and by going to court, she gave up all rights to Emma. It was downright awful. Martin was shouting and threatening everyone, including Emma and Eleanor, before being led out of the courtroom by her embarrassed attorney. Our family life was beginning to resemble a horrible episode of The Jerry Springer Show. Martin refused to comply with the judge's order, showing up at our house at unusual hours, ignoring the restraining order we eventually issued, and hammering on our door when we didn't answer. Even after spending a weekend in jail, nothing changed because the police proved to be ineffective deterrents. I decided to try another tactic. Once again, I sat across from Joanne Price in a downtown diner. $2,000 equals physical impact, 10 is permanent. I don't want her wounded, simply walk away, okay? Joanne accepted the envelope and left. I was not surprised to learn that Martin returned to Texas 2 weeks later. A year later, I was astonished to learn that she had returned to live with Brian Stewart when he was released on parole. Eleanor last told me that she and Brian were living in Nicaragua after he failed to appear for parole. I ended up speaking with Emma's therapist about Martin. She stated that it is impossible to diagnose someone without meeting them, but based on some of Martin's activities, she is likely suffering from one or more psychoses. I was relieved to see this woman gone for the foreseeable future. During all of this drama, I realized I had learned a marketable skill during my time in prison. My father provided me with capital, and I opened a small store in a shopping center where I did website design and personal computer repair. No ordinary corporation would recruit a criminal or trust them with that much information. However, running my own firm was successful. Very few, if any, of my clients ran background checks on me, and I played fair. I made $50,000 to $660,000 a year, enough to pay the rent on our apartment and provide for Emma and my needs. It had been 4 years. Emma and I have been jogging and biking together for the past 3 years. She's going to be an excellent middle-distance runner. Emma has caught the attention of the high school track coach. Next year, Emma will probably compete in high school as a sophomore. Emma and I spent Saturday morning bicycling and running a fun run in Crystal Lake, which included a 25m bike course and a 10 km run. Along the way, we stayed together. The last 2 miles, we followed a woman who pedaled quickly, even with one prosthetic leg. Emma remarked how courageous it was to compete with such an obstacle. Of course, this woman reminded me of Sophia, but she had short brown hair, and her prosthetic limb was completely different from Sophia's. I never once looked at her face as we passed her, but the memory of that night with Sophia almost embarrassed me. After all, I was with my daughter. It was not the best moment to be having such ideas. We switched from bike to run, and 42 minutes later, as Emma and I approached the finish line, a woman passed and finished in front of us. Emma walked up to her while we were catching our breath and introduced herself. The woman stood with her back to me, graciously accepting Emma's extended hand. That was amazing, thank you. Emma continued to walk and talk while I remained silent, not wanting to interrupt her. Emma always seems to make new acquaintances wherever she goes lately. She's been trying to get me to meet more people and strike up conversations with women she doesn't know. After a few minutes, they stopped and turned to me. It was a face I could never forget. "This is my dad, Alex Thompson." "Dad, this is Casey Sweeney." Now Casey looked at me, not recognizing me at first, then something flashed in her eyes. "Nice to meet you, Casey." I shook her hand. "Dad, I told Casey we'd stop at that spot on the river where you like to eat." "Casey has agreed to join us," I laughed. "That would be great. We're heading to the Broken Paddle." "Do you know it?" Now that Casey had some free time, she remembered when and why we first met. "Maybe I should allow you two to have some father-daughter time." "Let me take a reprieve," Casey said. "That's very good of you, but we've been spending time together all week. I suppose Emma would enjoy the companionship of another person of her making for a change." "Please don't disappoint Emma or me." "Join us," I responded. "Are you certain?" I replied, "Do I have to beg?" "If Daddy won't, I will." please come with us. Casey smiled. Okay, we'll meet there. As Emma and I loaded our bikes into the van, I said a little prayer that Casey wouldn't abandon us and meet us at the Broken Paddle. She did arrive, and for the next half hour, I sat at a table eating burgers and sipping beer while they conversed between appetizers like old friends. Emma was overjoyed to find that Casey had graduated from the Art Institute with a degree in photography. Emma's favorite institution in Chicago is the Art Institute, and she enjoys studying art in school. I spent some time listening in and discovered that Casey works for a marketing company as a product photographer for web catalogs. Most small retail stores that do not have their own staff employ an agency such as the one Casey works for to construct their websites. A young man interrupted their talk and asked Emma if she wanted to join him and his pals for a game of bin bag throw. Emma asked Casey and me if it was okay to do so. Sure, that would offer me a chance to speak with your father, I agreed, and Emma left with the young man. I watched her leave with my eyes, delighted I could keep her in sight. You'll have a lot of work complete. She's already a stunning young woman, I said. Yes, but she maintains her composure. I trust her, Casey replied. Thank you for joining us. I wasn't sure what to anticipate when you recognized me. I am delighted you did. I don't recall Emma becoming attached to anyone as quickly as she did to you, I said. I want you to know something. When I was in the industry, I did not react to males in the same way you did. The way you interacted with the man at the pub and how you treated me that night, why did you never call me again? I hoped you'd call. I chose to tell her the truth. I needed to handle my reunion with Emma first, and when that led to me becoming a full-fledged single parent, I concentrated on our relationship and Emma's mental health. I had just gotten out of prison, and it would have been easy to fall in love with you, especially given how attractive you were, and you didn't want to be in love with a strumpet. I did not say that, please do not put words in my mouth or think like that, I apologized. Do you still work as an escort? I used a finer expression to describe Cassie's career. No, not since I graduated and landed this job. I have a decent income and health insurance. I quit on the day I was employed. My medical fees were paid, and I received a new leg. How about your parents? I seem to recall you and them being estranged. You have a good memory. Mom is talking to me now. Dad still struggles to comprehend that I spent 18 months selling myself. He claims he would rather mortgage their home and drain his 401k, but I couldn't do that to them. It's been 3 years since my last date, and despite the fact that time has passed, Dad seems to want to forget that dreadful period in our lives. Cassie and I spent the remainder of the hour discussing Emma and our work. Emma returned to our table, and it was time to leave. Can Cassie come over next weekend for dinner? All I could think about at the time was how fortunate I was to have such a bright daughter. Dinner the following weekend marked the beginning of a series of dinners, dates, and finally, a romance. Cassie and I have been dating for just over a year now. I've been considering proposing to her, and Emma is okay with it. She adores Cassie, and they've become best friends. I'm going to seek Cassie's father for his blessing first. Hopefully, this will help them move forward with their slow reconciliation. Her father, like many men, wonders why Cassie's background as a call girl does not disturb him. Perhaps it would, but Cassie and I have discussed it. We both agree that marriage integrity cannot be compromised. Some could call me a complete idiot for marrying a former call girl and allowing her into my daughter's life, but let me tell you a story. 2 years before that race day in Crystal Lake, I was dating a lovely woman, and things were growing serious. She once asked me how I lost my 2 front teeth. I decided to tell her everything, including my friendship with Ron Young, but not about the ensuing attempt on his life. Soon after, she became unavailable for dates and meetings. The message was clear: she couldn't stand a man who had done what I did to survive a prison sentence. After a few months of getting to know Cassie, when things became serious and we went exclusive, I thought Cassie deserved to know the truth and let the chips fall where they might. Cassie looked up at me as I concluded the narrative, and her blue eyes gleamed. To survive, we may do actions that violate our self-image. The most essential thing is not to let it transform you from the inside out. You must forgive yourself and resolve to stay the same person you were before. You're back to being Alex Thompson, a devoted parent and a wonderful person. If you need to forgive yourself for what happened in prison, begin now, Alex Thompson. I adore you and believe you have nothing to be embarrassed of. Of course, Cassie didn't say anything when she hugged me, but she didn't have to. Sometimes, if you love the right person, forgiveness is all you need to live a happy life. Here is the next story. My wife failed to follow her marital vows and utterly ruined my trust. The most upsetting aspect was her desire to conceal her affair while continuing to live with me as if nothing had happened. Unfortunately, her plan was not successful. Could adultery be punished with death? Logically, I know it isn't, but in the heat of the moment, if I had my gun and caught my wife and her lover entering that hotel room, it might have felt like a justified reaction. Fortunately, by the time I arrived in my truck, I had regained my calm and merely glanced at the rifle I kept on the center console. I carry a .357 because I handle a lot of cash at work, and while I've just used it on the shooting range, I believe in the right to bear arms. After relating the story to my supervisor, I decided to take the rest of the day and most likely tomorrow off. I needed to hire a lawyer and make a strategy. I took $3,000 out of our joint account and started a new one in my name only, leaving enough for this month's rent and expenses. The next step was to cancel our one credit card, which we had only used for emergencies. We encountered fewer issues because we had switched to a month-to-month lease and did not have any children. I couldn't bring myself to forgive her, especially after realizing it wasn't the first time. Apparently, this was the fourth or fifth occurrence. I found the practice while reviewing our account online and noticing her stealthy money transfers to cover hotel expenses. Without my mind monitoring the statements, it would have gone unreported because the emails about the account were only sent to her. It's ironic, but if my debit card hadn't failed yesterday, I wouldn't have bothered to check our amount, and if I hadn't checked, I wouldn't have noticed the credit card payment, nor would I have reviewed the charges, which led me to the hotel reservation for today. If not for that, I would not have discovered my wife's infidelity, which resulted in our impending divorce. I realized I should have confronted her last night, but I was still reeling from the shock of her apparent betrayal. Now that we have the facts, it's time to take action. I looked online and found a divorce lawyer who appeared promising. Given our short 4-year marriage, I may be able to reduce spousal support despite her recent high-paying employment. I assumed we were still living month to month while saving for a house. It's becoming increasingly difficult to determine what she really desired. After doing all of that, I went home and drank a beer. That's when it struck me, I actually adore that person. Why would they betray me like this? What did I do wrong? I knew that if I sat there, I would drown in self-pity, so I grabbed some tape and began marking things around the house that I wanted to keep, primarily my gaming consoles, television, and workout gear. Everything else was linked to their memories, too painful to bear. As I wandered, I began to imagine revenge fantasies, but when I found myself picturing putting them in a lonely cottage with no supplies or breaking their legs in the bush for scavengers, I realized I'd gone too far. Especially when I imagined handing them a gun containing a single faulty round, so when they tried to end it, they'd only hear a click. Yeah, my thoughts turned black then. I understood that life isn't a fairy tale, so it was best to divorce and move forward. I was quite saddened when I discovered that Gwen, with whom I had hoped to grow old and raise children, would not be that kind of person. Memories poured back to me, a marriage proposal in the theater where we had our first blind date, a 3-day weekend in Myrtle Beach where I consoled her while her father was battling cancer, conversations concerning my transition to another work, a wedding night. Those recollections are now overpowered by a picture of her laughing and holding hands with someone else. My thoughts were distracted by the sound of the door opening. "Kyle, why are you returning so early?" she queried, running up to me for a hug. I walked back, putting the sofa between us, and just stared at her. There were no obvious signs that she had been with someone else today, but it came as no surprise. "Let us not play games, Gwen. I know you've been seeing someone from work, so I recommend you decide what you want. The divorce papers will be served on Wednesday," I stated flatly. Her reaction took me off guard. She almost seemed relieved. "I really apologize, Kyle. I should not have betrayed your faith." "You deserved honesty," she muttered. "You said you cheated, or that you were caught." I replied coldly. "I apologize for not voicing my displeasure. I regret not asking for a divorce months ago. I realized I wanted to go." "You deserved better from me," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "You have been seeing him for months." I couldn't stop the raise in my voice. Anger and hurt seized me. "No," she sighed, "we've only been together a few times in the last couple of weeks, but I've been wanting out of this marriage for the past 6 months." "What? Why?" I demanded. I felt as if my entire universe had been thrown off balance. "Because I am 25 years old and do not want curfews put on me. I especially enjoy spending time with friends. I refuse to be restricted by concerns about how alcohol intake may influence your work connections at events such as Christmas parties. If I find something I want, like a pair of shoes, I want the opportunity to buy it without feeling terrible about depleting our future children's education fund." She reacted in an angry tone. "So you've decided to return to your carefree early 20s, avoiding grown-up responsibilities? Okay, you've got it. I've withdrawn half of our savings. I'm deleting my name from the lease tomorrow, and I spent some money on an STD test. We were intimate last Sunday, and I believe you were with him before then. Clearly, I cannot rely on you to prioritize my health by providing safety. If you want freedom, it is entirely yours. Enjoy your new life, including your pals and employment," I said, struggling to control my rage. "Yes, Kyle. When we married, I was barely of drinking age. There are many life experiences we have missed out on. I thought I was fine with it at the time, but I'm not so sure anymore. Hanging out with Jeremy and his pals reminded me of the carefree days we used to have." What is the connection between infidelity and wanting to live a full life? How does wanting excitement justify adultery in a marriage? I assumed we were friends who would not betray each other. Like you, I am extremely disappointing. I used to believe it was only my mother and sister, but now I realize it's evidently all women that are unfaithful. I needed to stop yelling. Gwen winced slightly as I recalled my mother and sister. My father departed because of my mother's infidelity and sought solace in drink. 2 years later, he was gone. Instead of grieving, my mother grew enraged at the loss of child support payments. What little money my father had left went to my sister and me, while my mother spent it on cosmetic surgery. She encouraged my sister Adrienne to pursue relationships with wealthy men and even compelled her to take birth control pills. Adrienne was 18 years old when Tony Winter, the son of a wealthy businessman, got her pregnant. When Tony discovered that he was not the father of the child, he ended the relationship. Adrienne attempted to terminate the pregnancy but died as a result of complications. My mother attempted to sue the doctor, but the legal fees deterred her. The following year was difficult as I worked hard to get decent grades despite the fact that my mother was very popular. Moving into a college dorm felt like a relief from the commotion at home. A month after starting college, 2 local police officers paid me a visit. They brought me out of class to inform me of my mother's untimely death in a vehicle accident. It turned out that she was having an affair with her boss, and when they encountered his enraged wife, they fled in his car and collided with a garbage truck. Alcohol has a negative impact on his health. I was able to secure a refund from the college for the semester because I had to withdraw from participation to resolve the matter. Despite the pandemonium, our home was entirely ours. Surprisingly, my mother owned a 401k pocketbook with about $100,000 in it, as well as a savings account with $4,300. I also discovered a stack of DVDs and cash. The DVDs were classified for seniors, and though I hesitated, I watched one of them, which included a concealed tape of my mother with another man. Given the circumstances, I was not surprised that the amount was nearly $9,000. I spent a month looking through documentation and getting everything in order. Some friends stopped by to offer their sympathies, though I assumed some were men from the film. In the end, I sold the house, saved the money, and resumed the winter semester. I lived modestly and concentrated completely on my academics. I occasionally had casual encounters with girls but didn't find them particularly satisfying, believing that they caused more issues than they were worth. I graduated in the top 25% of my class and landed a managerial position at a growing construction company. One evening, I went to a bar with several buddies where I unexpectedly met several women. My view had changed, and I was considering the possibility of meeting a good woman. I believed I had hit the jackpot when I met Gwen on a blind date. Despite her age, she appeared to be in good health. She had recently graduated from accounting and had secured a respectable position in forensics with the state police. I believed I had everything, but it was discovered that all women were deceptive. Gwen began to cry, and I became enraged. She wanted out of our marriage, and they betrayed me by being with someone else. Nonetheless, she was the one who felt remorse, absolutely not I. I felt something inside myself snap. On Wednesday at noon, you will get divorce papers at your office. I've mentioned the belongings I'm taking from the apartment. They will be gone by tomorrow. You retain your car, and I will keep mine. My name will be removed from the lease before the end of the month. If you wish, you can have the place all to yourself after the first of the month. I took half of the money from the account. I expect the credit card to be paid off and cancelled. I do not wish for this to become unpleasant, mainly because I never want to see your dishonest, nasty face again. I took a long breath to calm myself down as I felt compelled to restate my criticisms. Tell your younger lover to keep away from me. I believe he simply took advantage of an opportunity, so I will not pursue him. However, if we cross paths, I will not hesitate to confront him, not because you are worth my time, but because a true guy does not chase married people. Someone needs to give him a lesson, and if not me, then perhaps the spouse of the next married woman he resolves to engage in an affair with. She shuddered at my repeated usage of the term, girl of easy virtue. No luck, I said, grabbing up my things and brushing past her. I will pick up the items and take them up tomorrow while you are at work. If you wish to fight this, remove the video, and I'll include it in the divorce proceeding. So the judge can make a decision, I said, departing. She never contested the divorce. When Mom died, I put all of the profits from the sale of her house and other assets into a trust fund. My accountant assured me that as long as my money is in the trust, it will not be included when calculating my net income to benefit students. She also recommended me to invest the money rather than keep it idle. However, it turned out that she was incorrect. The money kept in trust does play a role in financial aid, at least in the way she allocated mine. A year later, she declared bankruptcy. Another illustration of incompetence. My trust assets were connected to investments, so it was easy to obtain a few student loans. Fortunately, my firm had a program that allocated $5,000 per year to repay a student loan. I could have done it over. Overall, my bad relationship with my accountant turned out to be a wonderful one, despite not being protected from student aid owing to a lack of trust. It did shelter me from the divorce because I had not named Gwen as a trustee. There was approximately $600,000 in there that she couldn't access. I left the apartment and sought a small furnished loft near my office. I wanted to be fully separated from her, so I left everything to my lawyer. There were some conversations over my 401k and how to simplify buy things. I ended up handing her a check for $115,000 and walking away. After everything calmed down, she realized why she hadn't sought help. She had become pregnant and planned a summer wedding. I suppose all of her protestations about not wanting to commit were rubbish. Over the next year, I thoroughly committed to my job and was eventually promoted to a new position. I was appointed as the entire company's improvement assessment coordinator. We acquired several smaller enterprises. My objective was to improve their efficiency, traveling around the country. I worked to ensure that these newly acquired enterprises met our criteria. I gained the nickname Hatchet Man since my first goal was to trim the surplus. Many of these companies employed long-term workers who were not meeting expectations. After a 10 or 15-year reign, I gave them the opportunity to improve, but if they didn't, they were let go. Those with less than 10 years of service were more willing to adjust in order to keep their jobs. While I didn't want to target senior personnel, despite being unpopular with both management and hourly employees, I developed a reputation for laying off senior people. I stayed indifferent. My goal was to increase revenues for the firm, not gain friends. After all, bills would not be paid based solely on optimism. In terms of my personal life, I grew disillusioned with women within the first year after my divorce. I hadn't met any quality women, so why bother inviting them to dinner? In my second year, I had a need for casual intimacy, and since I had a lot of money and traveled much, I chose to support the world's oldest profession. There's a saying, ladies do not get compensated for intimacy, only for her to depart. It represented my existence wonderfully. I'd come into town, mind my own business, and either hire a top-tier call girl. Meetings were usually productive, and we both knew what was going on. I should have started this from the beginning. The connection wasn't for me. I had no idea what my ex-wife was doing, and I didn't care. Someone might expect me to say that I sought counseling to resolve my issues with Gwen and women in general, but I did not. Although consultations might be beneficial for individuals who require them, I had no desire to change. I attended a number of non-committal meetings, pocketed the most of my salary, and pursued my passion for refurbishing ancient motorcycles. I had moved an hour away and bought a large house on the outskirts of a little town. The site had a big pole structure which housed an antique 1969 Triumph Bonneville. Though I had requested that the garage be emptied out before the transaction was completed, it appeared that the previous owner had neglected to do so. According to the provisions of the purchase agreement, I legally own everything inside the pole building. Upon acquiring control, the motorcycle was partially disassembled. Its timeless design won my heart. Being skilled with my hands, I purchased a high-quality set of Mac tools and began the restoration process. By the time the former owner tried to reclaim the bike, I had made great progress, and after some argument, it was evident that their failure to retrieve it resulted in their loss of claim, which became mine. To avoid legal action, I offered them $500 in exchange for handing over the title to me, and they accepted. This was the beginning of my interest in refurbishing old motorcycles. Another job occurred shortly after when I discovered a 1963 BSA Gold Star Spitfire in need of repair. Despite not being a professional, my skills gradually improved, and instead of selling completed projects to fund new ones as planned, I found myself amassing a magnificent collection of restored classics. So there I was, 7 years after my divorce, with a good cash account, thriving at my profession, pursuing a fulfilling pastime, and having access to every company I could afford. I was feeling rather content, that is, until I got home with a new throttle cable for my most recent purchase, only to discover an old dilapidated Toyota automobile parked in my driveway. As I moved around it, I noticed a woman getting out of the car. As I stepped out, I came face to face with my ex-girlfriend, JWS. If there was a way to avoid this interaction, I would have used it. I know I have wronged you, and while I profoundly regret it, I cannot change the past. I wish I could, but it's not about me. This is about our daughter, she tried to explain, presenting me a snapshot of a cute little child with a big smile, a few baby teeth missing. It seems to be taken in a mall or somewhere comparable. She's adorable, I said. It's unfortunate her mother is such a promiscuous woman. So what's your strategy for claiming she's mine, given your extracurricular activities near the end of our marriage? She could be anyone's, I replied. She breathed out a sigh. Kyle, feel free to criticize me as much as you want. I made a major mistake. I was a nasty person, and I deserved whatever harsh comments you had for me. But our daughter has leukemia and urgently requires a bone marrow donor. I'm not exaggerating when I say her life relies on it. We've exhausted all other alternatives. She's on a donation list, but it may take years. She just has months. I know she is yours since Jeremy is infertile, and you are the only other person I have been with. You can detest me most of the time. I despise myself. If you want to confront me and vent your rage, go ahead. However, please get tested to check if you are a match. She was in tears by this point, but I remained unmoved. So you're recommending that I undertake a fairly intrusive operation to aid a girl who may or may not be mine and is being raised by another man? A man who has been present for her first steps, her first words, her first lost tooth. I missed all those moments due to your misunderstanding over who her companion was, and where you revealed my existence to her. Would you recognize me in a lineup? Even if I were the biological donor, I cannot legally claim the label of father, which belongs to the guy who reared her. By the way, where is the tiny cuckold? It appears that you two fell in love immediately after betraying me, I responded, noting her sad expression. Jeremy left us after he found out he was not her biological father. His parents coerced him into a test that revealed no genetic relationship. It turns out he is sterile, possibly always has been. I don't miss him, but it bothers me that he abandoned Laura alone in a hospital bed, never to return. He is the only parent she has ever known, and his abandonment affected her severely. So there is some form of retribution for you. I'm now a single mother living on welfare while caring for a severely ill child, she explained. Listen, she proceeded through tears, my life has been a nightmare during the last 2 years. Believe me when I tell you that any revenge you seek has already been served. Laura is the one positive thing to come out of our split. If you want to learn more, you will have to go through tests. Here's Laura's contact information and some images. Thank you, JWS. Get tested, she pleaded, hurrying back to her car. Her departure was delayed due to trouble starting the engine, which took 3 attempts. When I pulled out, I noticed oil drops on my driveway and went to get some cat litter to clean it. I examined her request carefully. Even if I may be called selfish, I couldn't face the notion of a child potentially being harmed, even if she wasn't biologically mine. No 7-year-old should be in such a dilemma. Surprisingly, I quickly decided to undergo testing and made the required preparations. Laura turned out to be my biological daughter, and the test indicated a close enough match for the bone marrow surgery. I organized everything without alerting Gwen. I also hired a private investigator to undertake a background check on Gwen, myself, and my parents. To my astonishment, her tale checked out. She had abandoned her, even annulling their marriage. For the past 2 years, Gwen had suffered financially, relying on aid and waitressing, while spending a lot of time in hospitals. Even with Medicaid, her medical expenditures had become extremely burdensome. Overall, their condition was gloomy. I decided to sell my bike collection to raise finances for medical costs and child support, which I knew I'd have to pay. Interestingly, I had declined all previous offers to sell my bicycles, but once I discovered I had a daughter, the decision became apparent. I startled the HR manager by requesting 4 weeks off and including my daughter on my insurance policy. Although she looked interested in the entire story, I remained restrained, knowing she was prone to silent chatter. I arrived at the hospital with paperwork for Gwen to sign in one hand and the biggest teddy bear I could find in the other. My heart nearly broke when I saw the petite figure with no hair and countless tubes attached to her body. I battled to hold back tears when she opened her eyes and smiled at me. That instant, I felt my entire universe change. I was resolved to protect this tiny kid from all harm and peril. I ignored Gwen's effort to embrace me and approached the hospital bed. "Hey," was all I could manage to say. "Hello. I am Laura. Mom told me you are my biological father," she replied. "Yes, I think I might be able to help you feel better. I brought you the teddy bear that I mentioned." Her eyes widened, and she eagerly reached for it. Her already enormous smile widened as she accepted it and hugged it tightly. "Thank you very much. What is his name?" she inquired. It was only a stuffed animal. Did it really require a name? They said you'd figure it out when you held him, so I replied cleverly, "It's Alex." "Hello, Alex," she announced, "thank you for coming to keep me company." She addressed the bear, "Thank you for bringing Alex to me, Kyle." She thanked me, and I was on the verge of losing control right there. If I were in that little girl's situation, I would have been filled with rage and despair, but instead, she was grateful for a simple stuffed toy. I looked at Gwen and saw a proud expression on her face, proud of her daughter. my respect for Gwen the mother increased significantly. To maintain composure like she has and still raise such a wonderful child was truly remarkable. However, she remained a lousy wife. Laura had fallen back asleep, clutching the teddy bear tightly. The transplant procedure had to be successful. I knew I would do whatever within my ability to make it happen. I gestured to Gwen, and we headed down to the cafeteria for a cup of coffee. I handed the papers to her. I have the paperwork here to add her to my insurance. I'll have a $1,500 deductible, then everything's covered. Fortunately, they haven't revoked the existing conditions rider yet, so she should be fine. I've arranged to have the bills for her healthcare sent to me. I should be able to clear everything within a few months. I informed her, withholding the fact that I had $50,000 from my bike sales saved up. It was a relief to see the tension leave her body momentarily. For a brief moment, she resembled her older self. I hadn't realized how burdened she was. Thank you, Kyle, for everything. I understand you may resent me, but thank you for doing this for her, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. It's what I would have done had I known, Gwen. I had our company investigate you, and from what I gather, you've been an exceptional mother. You will be punished soon for neglecting our daughter, but don't forget that I haven't forgiven you for choosing to end our marriage for a fling. Don't think I won't hold you accountable if you miss her first words, steps, or bike ride. You might have been a good mother, but you were a terrible wife, I stated bluntly. She lowered her head, and I heard sniffles. Once those sniffles would have pulled at my heartstrings, but now they have left me unmoved. Sliding another stack of papers towards her, I said, I set this up. It's a preliminary custody agreement. I don't intend to separate her from you, but I do want to be involved in her life. I'm proposing weekend visitations and 1 month during the summer with all alternating holidays. It's a pretty standard arrangement. Take a look, and we can discuss any adjustments. I will need copies of her birth certificate and other documents. Do you have them with you? She scanned my face, searching for something I couldn't discern before dropping her gaze downwards. I will have to fetch them for you. My car broke down, so I took the bus here this morning. I'll bring them tomorrow, she said softly. My stomach rumbled. It was lunchtime, and I needed the paperwork soon. Let's grab a bite to eat something other than hospital food while she's asleep, and we can pick up what we need afterward, I recommended. She nodded and wiped her eyes. Great, I thought, spending my lunch break with a tearful woman. How did I end up in this situation? Lunch was an intriguing experience, to say the least. For almost 20 minutes, we sat quietly, exchanging only the required words with the waitress to place our orders. Despite my immediate want to release a barrage of nasty comments at her, I stopped. Instead, I took a moment to ponder on why I couldn't bring myself to do so. It came down to the awareness that I would have to engage with her on a regular basis in the future, as well as the recognition that she was already struggling outside of her relationship with her kid. She seemed to have very little else. She had made her decisions and was dealing with the consequences. Strange as it may seem, my sense of fairness felt satisfied, but I still retained skepticism and didn't particularly like her. I vowed not to hang on to hatred. I'm not going to lash out at you, I murmured, stopping my own thoughts. She flinched slightly, giving me a perplexed expression. When you first approached me, you offered to allow me to express my frustrations to you. I will not do that. In fact, I'm going to make a serious effort to let go of any resentment and hate toward you. Our daughter is vital, and I refuse to expose her to the toxic milieu in which I grew up. You may never be my favorite person, but I'd rather let go of my resentment and ensure that our daughter grows up in a loving and stable environment, I elaborated. Some of the stress in her demeanor appeared to dissipate as I spoke. I understand you would not physically harm me, Kyle. Even though I believe I deserve it, I simply want to communicate, she began. Stop, I interjected, possibly too forcefully. I do not want to hear your apologies. There is nothing you can say to excuse your actions and how you did them. The fundamental fact is that you did not want to marry me and instead pursued extramarital romances. You could have been honest about wanting a divorce, but instead, you decided to mislead me and continue your affair while pretending everything was fine. It was not an accident, it was a planned decision. You are not the victim here, and I will not sympathize with the way your life has unfolded. If it wasn't for our daughter, I wouldn't want to see you again. But because we have a child together, I am determined to give her the greatest life possible. This entails having both a mother and a father. So let's eat and talk about how we can enhance our daughter's life. She looked at her burger and then back at me. For the next 20 minutes, we had a productive discussion about Laura and how we could help her during her sickness. Surprisingly, the trade was fairly pleasant. The neighborhood they lived in was really rough. I was aware they lived in government-subsidized housing, but I didn't realize how serious the situation was in that area. After parking my truck, I let Gwen go grab the stuff near the entrance to her apartment complex. 3 men were lingering with their pants down to their knees. I remained near my truck, wary of the surroundings. Gwen remained inside for around 15 minutes before emerging and passing by the gathering of men. Their leering eyes triggered my protective instincts, so I stepped out of my truck as they surrounded her. "Hey, CHA, you're too attractive to be living alone around here. You need a man to look after you, don't you?" The fool mocked her as he breached her personal space. My heart raced as I removed my Glock 19 from its holster. Many think that the .40 caliber cartridge is superior because of my frequent shooting practice. I favor the cost-effectiveness of 9mm bullets. Until just now, I never anticipated finding myself in a shootout. However, I was now less convinced. She already has someone watching out for her, so why don't you move aside until I've dealt with everyone? My voice may have weakened slightly, but I was still aiming for the initiator. The girl looked around as Gwen dashed to the truck. He hesitated to reach into his belt but changed his mind when he realized I was holding him at gunpoint. I sensed terror in the eyes of the 2 behind him, but their commander gave me a harsh expression. "If you grab a gun, I will pull the trigger." They'll simply interpret it as a scared white guy protecting his pal against immigrants who are stealing our jobs. So let us settle down, allow me and my wife to get into the truck, and drive away. Then you can get back to business, I said, taking a step back but still aiming for the leader. I managed to climb back into the truck and sit down while still holding it at gunpoint. I turned the ignition key, shifted into gear, and turned away. Only when I accelerated did I hear 3 big bangs before rounding the corner and speeding away. The next 2 times I ran a red light and went onto the freeway as quickly as possible. After about 15 minutes, I slowed down to ensure there was no one behind us. My heart was beating, and Gwen was sobbing in the passenger seat next to me. I yelled, "You are not taking my daughter back to this horrible place. What do you need to pick up from this apartment?" "All we had were our clothes and some dishes," she responded. "I offered to buy you new clothes and get her new toys. We'll empty your storage unit, and you'll temporarily relocate to my apartment. I own a 4-bedroom house with 2 bathrooms. You will take one, Laura will take the other. You will cook and clean until you find work. There are no boyfriends allowed at the house, and I will not bring any girlfriends. I travel roughly once a month for work. My residence will not be your hookup destination. Be serious about it. If I find out you're bringing males over, I'll kick you out and seek full custody of Laura." She looked at me and then at the floor. "I am not seeing anyone. Jews, I haven't had the time or desire for the previous 3 years, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. So do not worry about it." "Thank you. I understand you don't want me around, but it will be good to have a safe haven," she replied quietly. "You should thank Carlos," I responded. Carlos and I were inseparable as children, despite our different origins. Carlos was an affluent Hispanic youngster raised by elderly white adoptive parents, but I came from low beginnings and was often seen as white trash. Our friendship remained strong until Carlos became ill at 16. I paid regular trips to the hospital, seeing his slow demise as cancer devastated his body. Tragically, he died shortly before turning 18. 3 years later, his adoptive parents also died. Every day, I envied Carlos's parents' unfailing love and support. I wanted to offer the same for my daughter, even if it meant going through a terrible marriage. It was too late for me to have a normal life, but if I could provide my daughter with the warmth and stability that Carlos had, I was willing to make sacrifices. We took her items from storage and settled her into the second bedroom. Within the next few days, I may have gone a little overboard in decorating Laura's room, but she was my only daughter. Over the next 2 days, I prepared for the procedure. I don't like hospitals, and I believe the nurses assigned to me purposefully used the dullest needles they could find, but I got through it. Overall, it took a week. Little Laura improved for a month before it was determined that the medication had not been effective, so I was out for another week while they tried it again. It was unsuccessful, but the doctors received enough positive feedback to warrant a third effort. Eventually, it was successful. I welcomed Laura to her new home 4 months after her last treatment. This is where I share the story of how Gwen and I rekindled our love. Nope, it didn't happen. It may sound crazy, but I saw Gwen as two distinct beings. Gwen's mother was capable of being warm, caring, supportive, and patient. That was the Gwen who cared for both Laura and me. Laura had missed so much time at school that we decided to homeschool her for a while until she caught up. Gwen excelled at all of this, instructing Laura while keeping the house tidy and dinner ready. Then there was Gwen, his wife. I would never forget how badly she hurt me. Gwen the wife abused my confidence by concealing the fact that I had a daughter from me. Every time I began to believe that Gwen was okay, the rage resurfaced. I felt terrible since Gwen looked truly sorry for how things turned out, but I wasn't open to any hints of an apology. After using up all of my sick time, I returned to work. My first day back was quite difficult because I missed my daughter terribly. Walking out the door, I felt a rush of rage and envy at Gwen for being able to spend time with our kid while I had to work. This rage propelled me, especially when it came to reducing costs on my next job. While the boss would have been content with a 7 to 12% reduction, I was able to achieve a projected 16% reduction by reducing employee benefits and laying off some of the more senior employees. I did not make a distinction between hourly workers and supervisors. I reduced excess at all levels, which led to the dismissal of 3 managers. The plant manager was visibly relieved to see me leave. I couldn't get a flight out of town until the next day, so I checked into the modest airport hotel where I usually stay and spent the evening at the downstairs bar. I never choose luxury accommodations when traveling, especially given the optics of lowering costs and letting people go. Staying in a posh hotel and sipping on my expensive diluted scotch would only make matters worse. I noticed an attractive brunette enter the room. It was a familiar situation. She had probably failed at a few upscale clubs uptown and was now trying her luck down here. Fortunately, I was feeling amorous and had enough money to pay for her services for the night. We had a casual conversation, skirting the topic of payment. After entrusting my wallet and valuables to the front desk clerk, I led her to my room. Despite the presence of a safe, I couldn't shake the suspicion that she was armed and capable of forcing me to open it. She appeared professional, having texted someone her whereabouts and time frame, whether a friend or a pimp. Once inside, I placed $400 on the nightstand, which elicited a puzzled expression from her, given that our previous discussions had been around $300. It's been nearly 6 months, so I was hoping you'd be ready to spend a little more time talking with me tonight, I replied with a smirk. In reaction, she threw me in bed. She was good in bed and said nothing, but she understood how to gratify. After our session, she went to the restroom to take a shower, which seemed like a good idea given how sweaty we were. I felt the need to take a shower, too. I joined her, and after drying off, we sat down to talk and poured us some whiskey. I told her a truncated version of my story, and she nodded, making appropriate comments. She hurriedly changed, checked her look, accepted the money, and said farewell to me. I went fast asleep. The next morning, pressed into my uncomfortable seat on the couch, my thoughts drifted back to the previous night's meeting. It was definitely enjoyable. I've had several paid companions, and she was probably one of the greatest yet. Something felt off, but I vowed not to concentrate on it too much, instead focusing on what I could get for Laura, my kid. Laura had adapted excellently and would be starting second grade in the fall. I made sure Gwen had enough money to buy any clothes or toys she could require. I pondered whether she was too young to use one of the new tablets with sketching capabilities, and how about a cell phone at 9 years old? Did she really need one? I sought advice from certain acquaintances, despite the fact that I did not have many close pals. Perhaps my helper, who has children, might provide insight. At the airport gift store, I chose a stuffed frog for my daughter. I was truly enjoying my new role as a father when I stepped through the door. The inviting aroma of dinner welcomed me, and my heart was greatly warmed by my daughter's joyful squeal and close embrace. She wore a new dress with a ribbon in her hair. "Mom bought me this dress so I could look great for you when you get home," she said. "She also thinks I have enough hair for a fresh haircut." "Do you like it, Dad?" I could not control my feelings. A feeling of tenderness came over me, and tears welled up in my eyes. This little child was the missing link in my life. "You look wonderful, honey. You look stunning in that dress. Your hairstyle makes you look like a princess," I replied, wrapping her in a tight hug and kissing her on the forehead. "I've got something for you," I said, taking a bag from the store and revealing the frog within. "The girl at the store mentioned that this little guy needed a name, and I knew you'd have the ideal one for him." Her eyes shone with excitement as she looked at the frog for a time. "His name is Randy," she said. "Hello, Randy. I'm going to introduce you to Alex the bear. You two will be great pals." She started to walk toward her room but then came around and wrapped her arms around me again. "Thank you, Dad," she said. That little child was amazing. I looked at her mother, who had tears in her eyes. My heart fell when I realized Gwen had withheld this from me. I might have gone through this for the past 8 years. I shoved the thought away. My own mother was bitter about life, but I refused to let my animosity at Gwen taint my relationship with our daughter. So, I faked a smile on my face. Gwen must have noticed my change in mood since she became extremely somber. "Dinner smells great," I endeavored to speak in a regular tone. "Thank you, Kyle." "I searched up some old recipes and tried to recreate the chicken parmesan just how you like it," she replied. It was going to be a treat. Her chicken parmesan was amazing. "I'm certain it will be," I responded with genuine enthusiasm. She was doing her best to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Laura's sake, and I could do the same. Aside from that, it was pleasant to have my clothing cleaned in the house. My daughter and her mother had been living with me for around 3 months. Laura was such a delight, and if putting up with Gwen was the price, I could do it. I didn't want Gwen to go since I knew she'd take Laura with her. I pondered requesting primary custody of my daughter, but my lawyer warned me that it would be a difficult battle, given my work schedule and lack of parenting experience. Plus, a girl requires her mother. Laura returned to regular school around a year after they relocated. Gwen had efficiently taught her not only in the required courses but also in study skills and attentiveness, resulting in her consistent placement on the honor roll. Life was going well for me during my out-of-town trips. I occasionally found company, and my domestic responsibilities were completed with a clean home and well cared for clothes. Dinner was consistently served, and my kid remained the center of my universe. Gwen and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Her gradual emerging from her shell shocked me when she tentatively mentioned utilizing the automobile to find work. I had bought a newer second-hand Subaru wagon for her to drive Laura and run errands, a reliable vehicle with high safety ratings. "Gwen, that car is yours as far as I am concerned. I would not use it if you moved out. Its age implies it has limited resale value. Why don't I transfer the title to your name? If something happens to me, everything will go to Laura. It will be held in trust until she reaches the age of 18, at which point she will be able to make her own decisions. You should have a car to help her until she is independent," I told her. I could see her eyes well up with tears. "Kyle, thank you so much for what you've done for us. I am not sure why you are so sweet. You should know by now that I would not stand in your way of seeing Laura, even if I could, and the child support would be little more than what you now pay for the two of us here. Why do you treat us so well, or more specifically, me? I considered how to respond to her question. I understood something important for the first time. I wasn't angry with her past. I had suppressed it because I didn't want it to affect Laura, but suddenly there was a true lack of enmity. Let out a long breath and collected my thoughts. My mother poisoned me and my sister with her bitterness and hatred. I didn't want to tell Laura about it, so I buried it. Make no mistake, if Laura had not entered my life, I might have harbored anger toward you until the day I died. However, the situation has changed. The short answer to your inquiry is that Laura likes you, so do I. I feel we can move forward as friendly, if not friends, I explained. Tears started to pour, and she approached me with a hug. My allergies suddenly worsened, and my eyes welled up with tears. The release of pent-up wrath and hurt felt liberated, though the resentment lingered, it no longer engulfed me. Laura went into the kitchen and burst into tears when she witnessed our embrace. She joined in, and the three of us hugged each other close for a long time. My daughter walked across the stage to earn her diploma, and I felt overwhelmed with pride. Gwen sat alongside me, holding my hand, her eyes filled with sadness. Laura had been admitted to Harvard, and she wouldn't stop talking about it. Although I was ecstatic for her, the prospect of funding an Ivy League degree looked intimidating. Fortunately, she had received some scholarships, which reduced the strain on college finance. I didn't want to destroy her ambitions, but I was concerned about covering the entire tuition. My ex-wife had obtained a job and moved out 6 months after we spoke. We finally had a heart-to-heart, and she attempted to explain her reasons for leaving. She cited feelings of isolation from our friends and family, as well as the impact of new acquaintances, one of whom took advantage of her fragility. She admitted that after experiencing adultery, she found she missed being single, fearing my reaction upon learning that our marriage was the result of her pregnancy, motivated by fear and external pressure. She admits she never questioned Laura's paternity until the test verified it, though I believe she is in denial about certain issues. I have opted not to approach her about them. Regarding the jerk, sometimes karma provides a wonderful opportunity that you should seize. Our corporation purchased his business. Guess who was tasked with assessing productivity? It gets even better. The jerk's father had been at the company for 19 years and helped his son acquire the position. Both father and son were let go, along with 11 other employees. It took them roughly a month to figure out the relationship, then we started receiving threatening phone calls and emails. My decisions were justified by previous practices and performance evaluations. They sued my company, but we dragged it out until their attorney got bored of waiting for his money. The idiot should not have mistreated my daughter on his way out, and his father should not have humiliated her by referring to her as a mistake. Speaking of mistakes, I may have made the majority of them last night. Gwen was distraught over Laura's departure and came over to speak. By this stage, we were close friends who looked out for one another. She had been dating for a while and believed she had found a good guy. It turned out he was married. I helped her pack his belongings and delivered them to his startled wife. As a result, we began communicating and flirting, and before I knew it, we had developed an intimate relationship. I can put up with this one-time display of weakness by two persons having a shared history. However, I may have made a mistake by inviting her to spend the night, as we were intimate for 2 hours before falling asleep. I'm perplexed by a lot of questions right now, but today I'm focusing on Laura. Tomorrow, so I think we'll work it out. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.